Today on the Seatrade Maritime podcast, you're going to be hearing from a well-known personality in the Singapore maritime circles and internationally. From involvement with the Singapore Shipping Association and the IMO, to speaking on industry panels and selfies on social media, our guest today has a great enthusiasm for all things maritime. Hi, you're listening to Marcus Hand, editor of Seatrade Maritime News, and today we'll be in conversation with Akanksha Batura Pai. Welcome to the Seatrade Maritime Podcast, Akanksha.
Thank you for having me, Marcus.
Well, to kick off, perhaps you could briefly introduce yourself to our listeners and your role in shipping.
Hi, everyone. My name is Akanksha Batura Pai. I am the Executive Director of Sinoda Shipping Agency Private Limited. I am also the Strategy Head at RAX International Private Limited and TransAsia Marine Services Private Limited. I do a lot of volunteerism in Singapore. I am the council member at Singapore Shipping Association. I am the vice chair of the International Committee. I am the IMO Goodwill Maritime Ambassador and a committee member at Nautical Institute and the Mission to Seafarers Singapore, and also a Mission to Seafarers Global Ambassador. Very proud to be that. Basically what I do is I work in a services sector actually, but I do a lot of advocacy for maritime because I truly am thankful for what the industry has given to me and my family, and I would like to give back and make the industry a more attractive, equitable, and diverse one.
Great. There's a lot of stuff there to unpack, and we'll get into that as we move through the episode. But before we dive into the serious stuff, could you tell our listeners something about you that no one knows?
Okay, so I do have a couple of things, but I think I shall wow you with something that I really doubt that anyone would know. I have a black belt in karate I got when I was a teenager, and I have clearly since never practiced. Now, if you ask me to defend myself, I shall probably, I don't even know, I couldn't even throw a punch. But that's something that, I don't think anyone would really know about me. That is completely off maritime.
I was not expecting that, and I'll be careful what questions I ask you, I think.
You're fine, Marcus.
We're going to sort of take things back a bit. And how did you come to be in the maritime industries?
So that's actually a really nice question. I think I have seawater in my veins because I am the daughter of a seafarer. So I work with my dad, who's the founder of the companies that I'm part of. His name is Captain Ashok Batura, and he sailed on board NOL back when NOL was Singapore flag bearer. I mean, now my brother also works in the industry, but we were never forced to join. I actually did a lot of, I'm an NUS alumni, and my internships were basically in finance and marketing. I did a DBS Vickers one in New York, and then I did some L'Oreal projects in Milan. But to be honest, when I graduated, I just always felt that there was a need for young people in the industry, and most especially in the sector that we are in, which is, as I said, the services part of the industry, which is traditionally seen as dark, dirty, and dangerous. And so I just felt that I could make an impact if I entered. But even to be very frank with you, Marcus, even when I joined, like I think for the first 2 to 3 years, I was definitely floundering. Wasn't really sure if I was in the right place. So it was a steep learning curve. But once I found myself in there, and after I passed like a 3 or 4 year mark, and I, to be honest, found my calling with also volunteerism and getting to know the industry more and more, it felt more welcoming. So I joined the industry because I had exposure to it, but I've stayed because it's really made me one of its own, and I'm extremely thankful to that.
Okay, that's great. And you could have actually ended up quite a different route, judging by the sort of internships and what you did there. Coming more up to date, from your day-to-day role at Sinoda Shipping Agencies, what do you see as the biggest challenges and opportunities facing the industry?
So the challenges, honestly, are that capacity is a big constraint. Increasingly, these jobs are seen as less and less attractive. As I keep saying, we are in the services part of the industry, which is a mix of blue and white collar, and some call it this unique gold collar situation. So it is very tough to attract good talent, notwithstanding the differences that are now coming up with how the Gen Z work. But even then, the industry itself, I do agree, is becoming less and less attractive sometimes. So I feel like it's a big challenge. We have to compete with the gig industry, with more attractive content creation, for instance. And it's just, there were some industries that never existed 10 years ago and they are there. And so I feel like that's the hardest thing. And the challenges of the future can only be solved by cross-sectoral or multidisciplinary knowledge. So if you can come in with appropriate cross-sectoral knowledge, like for instance, basically knowing how to digitize properly, for instance, then you can make an impact. For instance, like we do agency and we work with traditional industries like harbor crafts and logistics and crew transport providers and things like that. And so I feel like if you can come in with the right, not just the intelligence of digitizing all of this, but even like the connections, because there are people who have come up with this in tech companies, but this requires hard work and fortitude, the right time and the right place. So I feel like this sector is very much ready to be quote unquote enabled. I don't like to use disrupted, but enabled. And so there is a lot of space here. And, with things like Pier 71 and all of these other accelerator programs that are coming up, there are very many opportunities. It's just about getting the luck. A lot of people are working hard, but it's the luck and the network as well. So a large part of maritime is still very much run on Excel sheets. So let's change that and let's make that better.
Okay, now you actually mentioned before, you said you've got seawater in your blood, or you feel like you do.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's always struck me about you is your enthusiasm for all things sort of maritime and shipping. And you mentioned there about the capacity side and attracting people to this industry. So what attracts you, and what would you say should attract a young person to come into shipping?
So to be honest with you, I feel like the industry is really fragmented, but very tight-knit. So if you're in a niche, you will probably only know what you do, but you may not know what the other person does. But I think what's increasingly happening is the industry is becoming more and more open, and you're able to understand your part in the bigger picture. And I feel like that is highly motivating for me as well. I mean, at the end of the day, like, this industry essentially transports 90% of our goods by volume. And, it feels like a very abstract figure when you think about it, but we play a part in it, right? However small it may be, that literally keeps the world moving. So I feel like the industry is so meaningful to me that that's what first attracts me to it. And I feel like then, as I said, it's such a tight-knit thing that the industry is very welcoming. And personally speaking, I feel like it's given me a lot. It's given my family a lot. As I told you a little bit about my dad was, he was born in India. He moved here as an immigrant. He was completely welcomed by this country. He was welcomed by the industry, and he made a living. And then he started a business in this country, in this industry, and he was supported. So I just feel like my life would have been so different had I not been part of this, of Singapore, of this industry. And so I have much to thank for this, and which is why I give back, which is why I want this to be an attractive industry for future generations as well.
Now, you mentioned that giving back, and you are involved with promoting industry at the SSA, the IMO as a Goodwill Ambassador. Could you tell our listeners a bit more about these roles?
So I was the ex-chair of the Singapore Shipping Association's Young Executive Group. This was about 2-ish years ago. That's when I started, and I am extremely grateful to the president, Ms. Caroline, and at that time the ED, Mr. Michael Poon, who gave me my shot at this, because I was really a very dedicated member of the YG. But they appointed me the chair. That meant I also had a voice at the council. And I feel like I really tried very hard to grow the community of the youth and to actually give back meaningful activities that would be helpful to that generation of people. And by the way, our definition of youth is below the age of 45, so it was quite generous. But even then, right, like, because there is a capacity shortage, like, we would find, like, even then, it's not that it's like a crowded space. It's a very nice niche space. But yeah, so I did that. And then I feel like because my work there was appreciated, I was nominated to become the IMO Goodwill Maritime Ambassador by the folks at SSA, and then my nomination went to the MPA, the regulator, and then finally got approved by the Ministry of Transport and submitted to the IMO. So in that capacity, actually, I volunteered a lot of my time to work for initiatives that would essentially advocate for the industry. And a large part of this was fronted and worked collaboratively with Singapore Maritime Foundation, SMF, and MPA, which is our regulator, Maritime and Port Authority. So I would do things like, and I still do things like speaking to students at various forums. There's a World Skills event coming up, and it has already happened. And then working with the Maritime Youth Ambassadors, and at events like the Youth at SMW, which is now become a flagship. The Friday of every Singapore Maritime Week, we have the Youth at SMW Forum, which essentially talks about, navigating careers in maritime and attracting talent to the industry. And it's just a very wholesome thing. Like, I feel like, and because you keep plugged in, you also kind of know what the challenges that are facing Gen Z. What do new entrants into the workplace want? What are their needs, and how can we match them? And sometimes it really helps you to think out of the box to see how you can change your processes, your business processes to suit the increasing needs of the newer people who are coming in. Actually, that's what I do. And now actually I've taken up a new role. I've been appointed to lead the Women in Logistics. There's a new community we've started up at the Singapore Logistics Association, because one of our companies, Rax International, is a third-party logistics provider. And so we are a member of SLA. And actually, see, that's the thing. We've been a member for like 10, 12, 15 years. I don't even know. But we've never figured out how to give back. So I feel like a large part of people don't have the time or the bandwidth. But then if there are aggregators that come around, because I'm often asked as well, like, who can we call on as a panelist? Who can talk about this? And I feel like even that is a service in itself that's so helpful, because you really can connect with a certain group of people that may have been already, feeling a bit left out. So that's kind of what I do.
That's an awful lot of stuff, actually. And I hadn't realized about the role with the Singapore Logistics Association as well. Congratulations on that one.
Oh, thank you.
I'd like to come back a bit. You were talking about the sort of stuff work you've done with younger people and so forth, and attracting people into the industry. For a younger person coming into the industry, what advice would you give them?
So I have two things. I think that, we often tell people to follow your passion, but I feel like there's literally no such thing as passion. It's a scam, and it's a little bit sad, because when we tell younger generations that, I feel like they keep spending their time trying to find it. But to be honest, passion isn't the cause of doing good work. It's the effect of doing good work. So when you spend enough time doing something, you learn to do it well, and you develop excellence. And that, I think, is the birthplace of passion. So it's important to realize that sometimes you just have to dive in, try it out, fail fast, fail forward. And when you try something, you figure out what you're good at, what you're not. And then you cultivate a passion towards doing something you get better at. So in my opinion, don't follow your passion. Just work hard on something you're good at, and then just see how that fits in, and just keep trying different things. And the second thing is to pay your dues. I mean, I think this is a problem with every generation that comes up. Like, it's just when you have an internship, when you are asked to make coffee, when you are made to photocopy. I mean, that was our time when we weren't as digitized. Work hard at even the smallest task. If you're given something small to do, just do it the best you can. Like, if you're told to photocopy something, say, do you want it double-sided? Do you want it stapled? You want a coffee? Okay, should I give you some sugar, some milk? What kind of beans would you like? I don't know. Like, it's just, going the extra mile is called paying your dues. And I feel like that gets you recognized, and you get the next task based on that. So much of what I have personally learned is because I've just done the grunt work with so much commitment that someone's like, okay, dude, like, fine, let's just give you this profile as well. And it's helpful. It's helpful if you're passionate and you show it. I feel like that's anyone can learn from. Yeah.
That's really fantastic advice. And I think that's quite interesting what you said about passion as well. It's like doing what you're good at and developing that passion for it.
Yeah.
Now, something else that I've noticed about you is networking, which you do both sort of, physically at events and so forth, and also on social media. So how important would you say networking is to building your career?
Yeah, so it's something I increasingly get as a off-topic question in events and get-togethers. But I'd like to address the social media part before I go to the networking part, because it delves that way. If you have Instagram, and if you find me on Instagram, if you scroll far back enough, even when I was a student, you'll see that I used to post very actively just because it's like a creative outlet for me. And so my social media presence on LinkedIn, for instance, started because I just truly just wanted to share what maritime was about. And I thought it was a great way to start doing it, considering I had the profiles of the YG and the IMO GMA, and I could see because I had access as a council member and I had access to certain panels and all of that, I could see that there was a real capacity problem. And so I just wanted to start sharing what maritime is about. And, the various nuances that go unnoticed and unappreciated. I wanted to share stories that are often unheard, perspectives that feel a bit too abstract to be shared sometimes, and even things about maritime that you just feel like, oh, that probably doesn't happen there. No, it does. We're a very human industry. And so now I feel like there is a lot more social media presence from maritime professionals on LinkedIn, for instance, and there's so much more engagement. And to be very frank with you, that makes me so happy because I feel like that's what's going to get us noticed and that's what's going to make this more interesting, and the industry has to become more attractive. And so that brings me to networking. So I feel like networking in this industry is important as any other industry in terms of if you're trying to get business. But because this industry is so fragmented and tightly knit, which is what I've mentioned, that making friends and keeping them kind of gives you a joy that's kind of unbridled and it can't quite be measured. So when you go for events, you're hardly going to ever actually talk about the same thing you guys do. I barely can remember when I've done that, but what you tend to do is it makes the industry more sticky. You stay in it, because you've made friends and you've done that. So for me, networking is more about, frankly, finding a way to understand the industry better, like to know what you do, how does it fit into the bigger picture, and how can I connect you to someone as well. And that's actually, I do that quite often. And I feel like social media does that as well because, then you keep connected. Networking doesn't stop at a physical event. You always keep connected online as well. So as much as I think it's important, I don't think someone should burden themselves if they're not a social media person. Don't worry about it. Just as long as you're honest, authentic, and you make friends, I think you're fine. It's really not just about finding business. I don't think that should be a pressure. It should just be an additional advantage of being in an industry that is so diverse that once you get to meet someone, you get to understand what they do.
So it comes down to the individual as well, then.
Yeah, absolutely.
Now, you've talked about an awful lot of different things that you do. And if you don't mind me asking, you've also got a young family. And so I was wondering, how have you managed to juggle family and career ambition? And what advice would you give to someone in that position?
So I think that's a very kind question because I think that implies that I'm balancing family and career, but I think I'm not. I constantly struggle as well. To be honest, I think there's no such thing as balancing work and family. I think that language itself it may be problematic because it makes us feel that this is a problem that can be solved and there's a destination to where we have to arrive. And this is something I've taken from Dr. Alexandra Solomon, who has shared this. It's far more correct to say that, your relationship with your spouse, your relationship with your kids, your relationship with your career, it's like an ever evolving dynamic and it'll always remain noisy and they will always fight over with each other and you'll never truly come to a balance. It's just constantly in flux. And it's always going to be a conversation that revolves around what are your current needs at the moment? Do you need to be caregiving at the moment? Do you need to prioritize your ambition or your passion? So to be frank, let's just not kid ourselves. There's no, and most especially for women, I am one, so I can speak from that experience, but there is no such thing as balance and it's in constant flux. We're just managing them as very dynamic variables and we have to give ourselves and others grace as well. And if I may, I could just want to share that, actually I've received so much fantastic advice from women in the industry. Sometimes I'll just, in the middle of a networking event, I'll say something like, oh yeah, it's a little hard sometimes figuring out, if you're spending enough time with the kids or should you be there more often or what time you need to get home. And they'll be like, come on, cut yourself some slack and it's fine. And hearing from women who've done it is just so powerful. So actually that's, again, coming back to networking. Sometimes it helps you for more than just business. So number one, there's no such thing as balance. It's always in flux. And number two, I think you need a village. And I am heavily supported by my family and my husband. And I don't just mean that you need to expect your village to show up. Like my mom and my mom-in-law, for instance, they're always helpful to me. But I think, especially increasingly in our metropolitan cities, you have to curate your village. You have to go out there and help your friends and family when they need help, with intention, with sacrifice, with the intention to curate something for yourself and for them. And when you do that, hopefully, I also believe in karma, you will also receive that more often than not. So I think one is that, you have to give yourself some grace and understand that you're never going to get a balance per se. And the second thing is you also have to do your part for others so that others can, at some point, return the favor.
I think that's a very honest answer to that question. It's quite refreshing, in fact, from a lot of these things you sort of hear about sort of personal development and so forth. I'm going to sort of move towards wrapping this up. But before we do, believe it or not, Akanksha still finds time for reading. So maybe you could recommend a couple of books to our listeners.
Yeah, actually, I will tell you, Marcus, my secret. This is a big secret. But because I used to have to put my baby to sleep and she was what you call a quote unquote low sleep needs baby. So I had to bounce her a lot. So what I ended up doing is I would just put my AirPods in my ear and start listening to a book. And so actually that's when I increased my capacity to take in books, but also from audiobooks. But so if you don't mind, some of these books I've read and some of these books I've heard. So I'm just going to give you a mix. So the first one, I'm going to give you 3. The first one is Between the Good Enough Job, Reclaiming Life from Work by Simon Stolzoff, and The Happiness Advantage by Sean Anker. They both are great self-development books to help with personal growth, but I prefer the second one, The Happiness Advantage, because I think it's more nuanced about how do you become happier. Everyone knows it's a choice, but how do you do it? And it's a really great science-backed and story-based and anecdotal book that covers all of that, and it's really lovely. The next one is Outlive by Peter Attia. This is literally I think as we get older, these are very helpful books because they actually talk about how do you actually improve your gut health? How do you realize that a lot of things are related to insulin resistivity, and how do you actually get better at it to be able to live better for longer, because we are living longer. And so how do you make sure that life is a little more, easy for you? The third is something I really did fall in love with, and it made me question or made me reevaluate my goals. This is a classic. It's called The Psychology of Money, Timeless Lessons on Wealth, Greed, and Happiness by Morgan Housel. So this talks about taking a step back and assessing our drive and our need to make money and what is the end goal. It gives you examples, and it's just, all 3 books offer valuable insights into happiness, well-being, and some personal finance. But, it's mostly about enjoying life more, especially since we live in Singapore and in maritime where it's 24/7 all the time. So hopefully these books will give you a little bit of a breather.
Quite a diverse, interesting collection of titles there. I shall have to go and look those up myself.
Oh, great, Marcus.
So just to round this off completely, looking ahead, where do you see Maritime taking yourself in the coming years, Akanksha?
That is a loaded question. And honestly, since I was a student, I've never actually planned my moves. So you even asked me, how did you join Maritime? I never thought about it. I never thought I would end up here. But I've always believed that, so I see value in having a blank canvas, but equipping myself with skill sets, becoming a better artist, but having a blank canvas. So I am an advocate for lifelong learning. So I'm doing a postgrad diploma with World Maritime University in Executive Maritime Management, and I plan to continue doing more lifelong learning, things like that. And to be honest, I hope with that skill set, I get better at managing our companies. I get better at understanding what the industry needs and to be able to see where the industry is going and try to get there fast enough that we remain relevant. Actually, that is my goal. And to be honest, I feel like a lot of things that have happened for me have not been able to be planned. And as I said, do the small things well. And I'm just hoping that we can keep doing more for our companies while also providing advocacy and increasing the profile of maritime from Singapore and internationally.
It's been absolutely fantastic talking to you today. Thank you so much for taking the time to talk to our listeners, Akanksha.
Thank you, Marcus. Thank you for having me. This has been absolutely wonderful.